thank you so much for joining me. Hey, before we get rolling here with the show, in anticipation for this episode, I was doing a lot of research and also going through my head certain jokes that I could tell at the beginning of this podcast. And I was looking for architecture puns, and I just kept trying to find them, and I was testing them on my girlfriend. And then she got so tired of my architecture puns, she told me that she was going to make me choose between either my puns or between her. But as much as I love my puns, I can't leave her. Cantilever. Terrible, terrible joke. Oh my gosh, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into What Magic Is. This is a podcast about magic, the occult, the esoteric, the paranormal, the supernatural, and the weird. We have a fantastic special episode for everybody today because not only will this be an audio episode, we have a video episode with this as well. And our subject is a doozy. And that would be sacred architecture. And we have the perfect guest, a guest that I've wanted to speak to for a long time on this show. They are an amazing author, poet, scholar, esotericist, and professional energy worker specializing in the ethnography and visuality of ritual, sacred landscape, esotericism, consciousness, and healing. Without a doubt, one of the most fascinating individuals alive in the realm of esotericism. His works such as Game of Saturn and Hagia Sophia, Sanctum of Kronos, are beyond fascinating. Welcome to What Magic Is This, Peter Mark Adams. Peter, how are you?
Hi there. Lovely to see you. Looking forward to this one.
Oh,
We've
man.
been cooking it for how long? I lost track of time.
It's been like
But
5 months. It's
yeah, right.
almost a half a year, but
Yeah.
I'm so happy that we're able to get you on this
It,
show.
it's much better because of that
I think so.
preparation, I think.
I
But
think
let's
so.
see if we can serve it up.
Oh man, it's going to be fantastic. So let's dive right in right away. How do you define sacred architecture, and what counts as sacred architecture?
Okay, I really have dwelt on this for quite some time, and my understanding is that it's any edifice that affects a shift in our awareness beyond the merely aesthetic, so that it engenders a sense of awe when we're in its presence. That kind of apprehension of being in the presence of some greater significance, and something that has been expressly wrought to articulate the unsayable, so that it enforces a certain suspension of rational appreciation. It goes beyond that. From my perspective, then, from a design perspective, it's when the principal aim of the architecture is to elicit this type of response, and thereby to honor, in a sense, the deities, spirits of place, or ideals that drove its development in the first case. So
Fantastic. So I have to ask you, and this is a very personal question, but what do you suspect is going on with buildings that a lot of people over the centuries and even millennia, that they these buildings not only just inspire awe, but people report going to them and feeling something unlike anything that they've ever had? How do you think that you would try to explain why these buildings have the capacity to do this?
I attribute it to five different factors that I've identified, and some places share a number of these, some of them just one, some of them a couple. So the five factors I've identified are under the headings of alignments, placements, symbolism, resonance, and presence. And I can very briefly give you an example of each of these.
Please.
So let's kind of make it. So by alignments, I mean when an edifice is aligned with certain stellar, solstitial, equinoxial, or geographic features. And we can like track this all the way back to like the Nabta Playa in the desert west of the Nile. So they were looking like 6th millennium, maybe the 7th millennium. And there's stones set in the ground which are clearly aligned with especially the polar stars. And this is associated with ceremonial rituals and ritual burials of cattle facing west.
Hmm.
So that in a sense, in that 6th millennium, we can already see the building blocks of what will subsequently become core elements in Egypt's culture. And another one people may not be familiar with, and I'd urge them to check out some of the fantastic animations that now exist on YouTube, is the Hittite calendar temple, Yazilkaya. And that is a phenomenal sacred site in which the deities, stellar and solar alignments all come together in the middle of Anatolia. So that would be from like 2nd millennia.
Okay. Wow.
And finally, I'll probably add the maybe questionable, maybe not. I mean, I'm prone to accept it. The Giza Pyramid Orion Belt Association. I know it's not perfect. I know there's a lot of debate around it, but it makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
So under the heading of alignments, then they're the kind of places or assemblages, perhaps is a better word, because there's like multiple elements gone into these sites to produce distinctive alignment effects in relation to their sacred purpose.
Got it.
Okay, so the second category I mentioned was placements.
Mhm.
And you see this specifically with the presence of earth energies. That's to say, points on the Earth's surface that have distinct geopsychic properties. And for instance, if you look at the temples of Apollo that line the Aegean shore of Anatolia, from Troy all the way down and then across in the Mediterranean coast, I just pick out two at random, Claros and Didyma. And you find that, I mean, for me, Didyma is a very powerful site. If you walk onto the temple itself, you can feel the energy. The serpentine nature of that energy is reflected in the columns, which have like a serpentine coiling around the base of the columns. And I said geopsychic for a reason. All of these sites, and this includes the Temple of Hecate in Lagina, have strata disruption beneath the temple site. So there's like a break in the rock strata, and there's a flow of water that changes level.
Hmm.
Okay, there's always a flow of water at these sites underneath them. And it gives rise to electromagnetic effects.
Yeah.
That's why I call them geopsychic.
Hmm.
So they're sitting on top of centers of power leakage, let's call it,
I like.
which which like has the capacity not only to energize your own Kundalini energy, but also to activate a more dynamic range of awareness. So this is highly appropriate for any site which is engaging in prophetic, has a reputation for hundreds of years for the qualities of the prophecies that are, oracular sites. Okay, so that's what I meant about placement. These are sites that sit on top of specific points, and I could briefly illustrate that. I do have a slide which I can show you if that's okay.
Absolutely, 100%.
Um, let's see if we can just get to that. Let me just, in fact, I can just um, illustrate what I've just said. So, this, just moving in, we looked at alignments. This is what I was talking about, the Nabtaplaya.
Oh, wow.
So you got a circle, you got the rocks, the alignments with the stars that never set, as they would say, the imperishables. That's to say the stars that circulate the pole star community sacrifice ceremony, the cattle burials facing west, all of that stuff is there. This is Yazilkaya. It's beautifully reconstructed
Wow.
by artists. All the deities are there, male and female, and the passages and gaps are all oriented so that at different points of the year, for instance, you'll get the sun at the solstice or this kind of thing. The whole site is oriented to the skies. This is Didima.
Mhm.
Okay, so placement. This is the interior of Didima, and you can see at the very back there, there's a tiny little enclosure, which is the original oracular site, and then that's above a small spring.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, so I just wanted that. And here's another one. This is the research done by Paul Broadhurst and
Yes.
Hamish. Okay, so phenomenal lining up of sites of St. Michael until you
Yes.
get to Jain when they shift to sites of Apollo.
Right.
But the alignment is absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's kind of breathtaking. Okay, so I just wanted to let me come out of this if I can. Yeah, there we go. We're back.
Amazing. uh,
that and get back on track. Symbolism. The Hagia Sophia I could probably talk about for a long time. It has two aspects because obviously I dug into this
yes.
over the course of like 30 years
right.
uh, living next to the building. So I was able to visit it until finally it kind of started to give up its secrets. And they were of two kinds. First, in terms of symbolism, I recognized that the interior decoration can be read as representing the Hellenic underworld. Okay.
Okay.
There's like these four green strips set into this vast marble floor, which are straight out of Plato's Gorgias, the four rivers of purification in
Wow.
the underworld. And then there's like a, a tier above that goes right round the building. This is where the court would have sat during mass,
Right.
and that's like decorated like a meadow. And in the Hellenistic system, it's the meadow of judgment. So this is where souls go upon death, and they're judged to either descend down into the underworld or ascend to the Tower of Kronos, which is, Kronos is associated with the Golden Age, and sure enough, the domes are covered in literal gold stella. Okay. So yeah, that made sense, but also the top down view of this building. I mean, I realized that the architects had a kind of a lineage. They had studied in Alexandria under um, Eutropius, and before that, possibly Ammonius Hermias. Ammonius Hermias was probably the greatest student or pupil of the great philosopher Proclus. Okay, so Proclus was taught and initiated by the granddaughter of the last hierophant of Eleusis. So when they Theodosius declared the sanctuaries closed at the end of the 4th century, the last hierophant, Nestorius, and his son Plutarch of Athens, who was a priest of Asclepius, set up a center in Athens to ensure that the initiatic lineage would not die out. And the way they ensured that was to train and initiate Plutarch's daughter, Asclepiogenea.
Hmm.
And for the whole of the kind of 5th century in Athens, she continued to give the Eleusinian initiation and teach theurgy. So most of the major so-called Neoplatonic philosophers from the school of Athens were initiated by and taught by her, and that includes Proclus.
Wow.
Okay, so his great student was Ammonius Hermias, who went to Alexandria and continued the tradition there, and his successor Eutychius was certainly the teacher of the two architects, or designers, better to say, of the Hagia Sophia. So there's a lineage here.
Right.
Okay, and these guys are coming in with a very strong metaphysical and Hellenistic and initiatic background. So they're given the task of designing this building. Uh, and Justinian, of course, didn't have a Hellenistic background. He was essentially he took over from his uncle. His uncle was an illiterate swineherd.
Right.
He rose to the top of the Praetorian Guard, and then when the time came, he muscled his way into the purple. So Justinian came to power on the back of his uncle. You know, his uncle was illiterate. Justinian had a theological training.
He's a
So these
theology
people,
student, wasn't he?
yeah, I mean, they're essentially isolated from the Hellenistic culture
Right.
that they presided over.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then sought to destroy, of course, because they were trying to enforce a state-sanctioned orthodoxy on everybody. So, but the designers of this building came straight out of that Hellenistic culture. Okay, so that's why it was so easy to discern within the architecture strong Hellenistic elements. And basically, top down, the building reprises the process of cosmogenesis in Plato's Timaeus, which is actually a Pythagorean text.
Right.
Okay, so it starts from a dot, the circle, the arches, semicircles, the dome, and so on, it all the way down to the square at the bottom. And actually, that helps to answer a question about the. Let me just again, if I could just quickly shift to an illustration because it's worth 1,000 words,
Absolutely.
1,000 of my words. So this is the ground plan of the Hagia Sophia.
Hmm.
And what you can see, so we're talking now about sacred architecture in a geometrical sense. So what they did is lay out the squares like 60 by 60 royal cubits. The royal cubit, of course, is the temple measurement derived from Egypt.
Okay.
Okay. So within that, they inscribed the circle, and then they cut the circle in half and moved the two halves out to the edges of the square. That gives you the longitudinal axis of the building. It's that simple
Hmm.
because that circle will also be the size of the dome.
Oh,
So
okay.
then they build the blue colors are four massive stone pillars that go up like 30 meters. And on top of them, they build these arches and they fill the gaps between the arches with these triangular shapes.
Hmm.
And on top of that comes the dome. So, very quick overview. Now, why this is so important really is covered in this issue of resonance, which is our next category. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
The building has no embedded Christian decoration or illustration whatsoever for the first, like, I don't know, 40 years of its life. And that is remarkable when you consider the buildings in Ravenna, okay, which was the Byzantine capital of Italy,
Right.
were built by the same, designed by the same people, built by the same people, and decorated by the same people pretty well.
Hmm.
And they are covered head to toe in dense mosaic illustrations of the life of Christ, the life of the saints, the emperor, his entourage. It's like the most intense concentration of Christian imagery you can imagine. And so it's like the Hagia Sophia exists in a kind of aesthetic world of its own.
Hmm.
And nobody has been able to explain this. It's like, okay. I
The Christian elements were added later on, obviously, right? But
much later on. The first Christian mosaics were from about 900 onwards.
wow, that late.
So
Okay.
that's like 400, 500 years after the building was inaugurated.
Jeez. Okay.
Okay, so there's a substantial gap
Yeah.
between its decoration as a Christian, identifiably Christian artifact and its inception. And that really requires some explanation. There's two aspects to this. First of all, the Hellenistic temples had a distinctive um, acoustic and optical signature.
Okay.
Okay, the echo of this we see in texts like the Papyri Greca Magica, where you have strings of vowels, okay, which everyone says, they're kind of nonsense. They're not.
The
They're
barbarous words and
Yeah, they're
yeah,
actually. You're going to be able to listen to these now
amazing.
because they provided the foundations for the Byzantine choral
Okay.
song. So Boethius, who was a pagan, wrote De what was it? De Edificorium Musica, the foundations of music. 3 books. First book was the cosmological associations of music. The second book was the associations between music and the humors or natural um, vibrations of the body. And the third book was about instrumentation as playing a role. So it's like, the heavens, the energy body, and then instrumentation. And this basically provided the foundations for Christian choral music going forward.
Amazing.
Okay, so what we've actually got here is a throwback to Hellenistic temple culture performance.
Right.
And we'll play this short audio track, right? So you can see for yourself how sound and light have been harnessed within this building to generate a specific effect. The floor and walls are covered in very reflective marble surfaces.
Hmm.
Okay. The domes were made up of thousands, well, millions of tesserae, that's small mosaic pieces. So what they did, they took large sheet of thin glass, they coated it with gold, real gold, I mean gold foil,
Right.
put another sheet on top of that, and then they cooked it in an oven. And when it fused, they cut it up into these tiny pieces, 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter, and then they embedded them into the domes and semi-domes and the cathedra so that they all had a smooth, reflective surface. And this was one of the specialities of the designers, actually. Both designers actually, they were not architects. They were above that.
Okay.
The day-to-day work was actually advanced scientific research. And, Anthemius's speciality was reverberant spaces and reflective surfaces. That's the advanced research he was doing. And Isidorus was a specialist in three-dimensional geometry and the construction of advanced arches, domes, semi-domes. So these two come together in the architecture of the building. And what they do is they create the dome very flat as a vast gold reflective surface. Now, the resonance in this space in a normal concert is like 3 seconds sustained kind of resonance, okay?
Okay.
In this space, it's up to 12, 13 seconds.
Huh.
So the sound rolls around the space and it's infused with a golden light. Okay, so let's, let me shut up.
Absolutely.
Uh, and let's have a look how that would actually work. If we could, if I can just, okay, I'll just switch the share screen to this. And here we are. I hope you'll be able to.
so good. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah. So this is under the heading of resonance.
Right. I hope everybody got that. No, that's
Oh,
incredible.
you'll see on your playback anyway.
Oh no, it'll be fantastic. Wow. That's in I have to ask you, Peter, because you live in Istanbul, have you ever been in the Hagia Sophia and had a performance such as that put on?
No, it's not possible since it
Mosque.
was yeah, it's a mosque now, it was a museum, and one of the conditions was that no sect or religion should dominate it. So this it's very fortunate. What happened was this Stanford University took a balloon and they got into the building and were allowed to pop the balloon
Okay.
and nobody was in it. And yeah, they recorded the pattern of resonance and then they put that into a filter and had their Byzantine choir, Capella Romana, sing a Byzantine choral,
Wow.
okay, piece, and then put that song through the filter so that it reconstructed the actual sound that you would have heard in the building. And that's what we just heard now.
Oh,
So two aspects of that is one is just how atmospheric it is.
right.
And the other one is you could hear those long droning sounds built within the chord. So this is the barbarous names,
Right.
words of invocation be
Yeah.
actually being used
Yeah. Wow.
because they're sung with a slight variation at a frequency that energizes certain aspects of your energy body.
Hmm.
Okay, so that's what's going on there. Resonance, number 4 on my list of. Okay, so moving on then. The other category I put was presence.
Presence.
Yeah, this is a little more difficult to explain. One of the characteristics of many sacred sites is that they were not discovered, they were revealed. Okay, so for instance, the myth of Didyma is the Branchidae, who were the hereditary priesthood of that site. You know, it's like he was a shepherd. He was sleeping one day, and then he was in his dream. He was told there's an oracle to be established here.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so he doesn't discover it; it's revealed to him. There's a certain presence which probably, I think you ask about this later on, but we can deal with it here because it's
Yeah,
come up.
yeah,
For
definitely.
instance, walking around Glastonbury one day, I was on this kind of back path, small like country road, quite a distance from the tour, but it was just in the background. And as I walked on through this lane, all of a sudden I stepped into this blast of what felt like cold air. But cold is not the right word, if you know what I mean.
Right.
It had another quality. And then when I stepped back a meter or two, it was normal again. So advance forward, and there was this distinct, like, there's like an invisible stream coming off the tor and through crossing this road. You know, the energy was so tangible there. It was unbelievable. Even stronger, I can say, than what I've experienced in Didyma, you know, which is again very intense. So when we talk about presence, there's normally we talk about the spirits of place.
Right. Okay.
Um, we also have to take account of the fact that certain places have other dimensional entities and beings associated with them,
Right.
you know, and that is a far less tangible aspect of sacred architecture. But nevertheless, it's a very real one that we need to take account of. There is an aspect of the Hagia Sophia which again is quite strange, but it's never really talked about. I'm not sure. I don't think I illustrated it. Unfortunately, yes, here we go. Let me just show you this. So this is a panel from the narthex. And it's probably clear to everyone that it's not random.
No.
You know, to get this kind of pattern in a huge piece of marble block, um, you have to slice it. You have to select the block carefully. You have to slice it and then trim the panels so that you have these matching. So there's a lot of deliberation goes into this. But the Hellenistic concept is of akeiropoetia, images not made by human hands.
Hmm.
So that the things that look like entities and beings within natural surfaces are deemed to be the imprints of the demiurge or intermediate beings.
Right. Hmm.
And in this case, these are kind of cyclopean beings, one eye, okay? And they have a tradition as the overseers of large scale construction. And that's interesting because, you know, that was kind of the Watcher's brief, wasn't it?
Was, yeah. Yeah.
Rod was one of the Watchers, and he was the overseer, of course, of building. So there's a strange kind of overlap there. I
I,
just want to point that out because I believe those presences are active within the space. And although there's a whole series of these panels high up decorating the narthex, uh, most people just most people within a secular worldview cannot see anything more than decorative paneling.
right.
Or
That, but I think
nobody,
you're entirely correct. That's not these kind of things are not just that's not there just because it looks pretty. There is a real reason, most likely, as you said, that that was selected.
yeah. And I believe they were a highly active presence. So the only point I want to make here is when you become aware of this, you need to, if you're going to immerse yourself in a sacred architecture,
Hmm.
you need to be aware of the spirits of place,
Right.
and you need to be careful not to violate their domain without their permission, basically.
Nice.
You know, a lot of people will laugh that off, but I'm saying to you, you know, if you're really going to absorb that, if you're going to get into what that space represents, then you need to be ready to make an accommodation with real entities and beings. Okay. In my background of like 20 odd years of energy healing, most of the entities we encountered were parasitic. But this is a different order of being. You could say these own the space that you're entering.
Right.
Okay. If you're going to make any progress with your understanding, with your illumination by what it has to offer you, then you're going to have to talk to them. Okay. Make a deal, you know, give an offering, respect
For sure.
is very important. Otherwise, it's not going to work for you. You know, it's just going to be another tick on your bucket list. Yes, I went there.
Right. Right. Exactly.
So it's probably a question we'll talk about a little more later on is how do you approach and enter and have a presence within a sacred architecture which is meaningful as a spiritual experience or a healing experience. And I think this is a big part of it.
Okay. Fantastic.
Okay. So a couple of concepts there, Santa Marta, Symbola. Most people will know these from Goetia, from erecting, you know, basically workings.
Right.
Uh, Santa Marta, that's to say they they participate in the source at some point. Okay. So they have a direct connection with higher order beings, whereas Symbola are like assemblages. So these concepts cannot be made sense of outside of an animist perspective.
Right.
Yeah. So is like two legs on which animism stands, and one is like analogical, which is the fact that something on a higher order realm has reflexes lower down. And the other one is like totemism. That's to say that things that are similar to or share qualities with are also energized because of that. Okay, so these are the two dumb. Without this, you don't have magic. I mean, it doesn't exist. Okay, so these were fundamental to this architecture, on top of the Akira Poetia, which are the images impressed upon matter by intermediate beings.
That's something that not a lot of people are going to know too much about. But let's work our way through a culture where we look back for thousands of years. And it's the one that everybody's going to know. When we talk about sacred architecture, people are going to bring up Egypt. So, as someone who has specialized in Egyptian mysteries, just how amazing are the monuments of ancient Egypt, from the pyramids to the temples to the obelisks? What makes them so fascinating and have such a hold on our imagination and I'm just going to say the psyche to this day? Kids are fascinated by ancient Egypt, and it's almost inherent, and that goes for almost every culture around the world. It's just ancient Egypt has done something to the human mind, or perhaps it's just they're such a fantastic encapsulation of sacred architecture. What are these, like the greatest examples of sacred architecture in your opinion?
I think there's some of the most resonant. I was also hooked on this stuff when I was a child. Um, I was very fortunate because we went to live in East Africa at that time. I was 8 years old and dropped off in Egypt. So I was actually able to go into the pyramids. I was in Cairo Museum. I saw all the Tutankhamun treasures at that time. So, it's kind of inhabited my imagination ever since, as you can imagine. But I'd like to, if I could just disambiguate this word mysteries, which is often associated with Egypt. Um, my course, the three-part course that I have online with the Magical Egypt people, is about the mystery cults. Okay.
Right.
Um, and they were essentially experiential rather than discursive. That's very important because a lot of people think of the mystery cults as teaching secret knowledge or
Right.
hidden wisdom. Okay, it's
Yeah.
not that. The mystery cults introduce you to the deity directly, face to face, in person, close at hand. And therefore, they are best seen as a refinement of kind of primitive possession cults. The mechanism is possession. Okay. And I would separate that from discursive secret teachings. So when people start thinking in terms of Egypt and secret teachings, it's important to recognize that this was a Bronze Age theocratic state. So that the priesthood had many grades indeed and many specialities, but it was isolated from the rest of the population in respect of its knowledge base. Okay, so whereas in Greece, everybody could show up at Eleusis or any of the sites where the mysteries were being enacted and they could participate in it, that was not the case in Egypt. Okay, the mysteries were enacted on behalf of the Pharaoh, who was divine, is a god, and through him, the benefits of his divinity flowed to all the land and its people, as long as the priesthood continued to enact the rituals honoring the deities. Okay, so it's a real different paradigm
Right.
than the Hellenistic one.
Right.
Okay. Now, unfortunately, especially in the 19th and early 20th centuries, a lot of people have thought that Egypt had a hidden discursive teaching.
Right.
There's no evidence for that. Okay. None at all. It's an imposition on top of the culture. What it had is a graded system of initiation for the priesthood so that they could enact the various roles and ceremonies that were necessary to honor the deity. And the high priest, so to speak, was the pharaoh himself as the son of the deity. He would have to, get up at like 4 in the morning and start a routine of ritual washings and purifications, and then be at the temple doors, for dawn. There was like a 60-step ritual process to enter the temple, honor the deity, and come back out.
Hmm.
Okay. This was not secret teaching. It was just the teaching necessary to enact
Right.
this many, and there were a whole body of people assisting him at the various levels. There was so much stuff to be prepared, so much to be cleansed. So I don't know where this idea of some secret discursive teaching of ancient Egypt arose. I'm sure it arose somewhere, but I
Yeah.
think it's because people didn't grasp the fact that the mystery cults were not discursive. Their first-hand exposure to the deity, to be possessed by the deity, and to have that visionary experience. Okay. And the third element is mysterious is used as like unexplained, like
Right.
mysterious Egypt, right?
Right.
So, the danger is these three kind of meanings kind of collapsed onto each other and have given rise to all kinds of strange growths, outgrowths. So, okay,
Particularly these days, a lot of YouTube videos and a lot of
yeah,
yeah, a lot of speculative archaeology.
yeah, indeed. So, what we have then are some extraordinary structures like the Great Pyramid. Um, the, I think the problem for a lot of people is they don't understand that the Great Pyramid is like the midway point on a journey that started in, I don't know, the pre-dynastic period and slowly built up towards the realization of a pyramid form out of the mastaba. The mastaba used to be just a mortuary temple, which was just a square enclosure. And then somebody had the idea to put another layer on top of that. And then as this continued to evolve, they put extra layers on. And finally, they smoothed this stepped pyramid structure out with a casing, essentially. Okay, so that the thing has an evolutionary life. It didn't just spring out of nowhere.
Right.
It didn't drop out of the hold of a massive UFO onto the planet.
Yeah.
Okay, it has a history. That said, the interior spaces are bizarre. You know, it's difficult for us to understand the geometry of its interior design, although, an advanced pulley system with counterweights. I mean, I've seen some excellent explanations for that. And that includes this hidden cavity above the Grand Gallery,
Right.
which nobody has accessed yet.
No. No.
Okay, and then the mysterious star shafts, not all of which are open.
Right.
One has like a door in it,
Yeah.
and it's you're just like, wow. I don't have an answer. I don't think anyone has an answer at this stage. The dimensions of this structure have always attracted a lot of attention, not least by people like Sir Isaac Newton, who was trying to calculate stuff about the universe based on the unit of measurement used, around the circumference of the Great Pyramid. He spent, a lot of time and effort on this. And he believed it was associated with the Temple of Solomon as well. And there's like a body of like revolving myth and analysis around this, and it has led to some extraordinary claims regarding the placement of the pyramid on the planet, and its relationship to certain what we take as fixed, like the speed of light.
Right.
I'm not really qualify to comment on that. I remain receptive but skeptical, let's say. And I think that's all any of us can do at this stage. Um, However, that said, there's some stuff that we can now move forward a little with. Um, and I think you were going to bring up Lubitsch, for instance.
Yeah, when you had made the point while we were going through the process
Yeah,
of coming up with the questions for this, that a lot of people's entry point and the place where they stay regarding things like sacred architecture, or even we could use the word magical architecture, is they learn about Rene Lubitsch,
yeah,
and it stays at this level of it's all about symbolic and
yeah,
symbolism. And you're like,
yeah,
you said you were hesitant to talk about this because you don't want to piss people off, because a lot of times this is all that they know. But I tried to reassure you, like, I am all about trying to give a real history of esotericism, because I think it's real. I think this stuff has
yeah.
currency, and so what is your main argument against this idea of particularly, as people who are familiar with the Lubitsch's work, with the Luxor complex is as a human being, and all of these kind of
Yeah.
speculative archaeology. Why do you push against this?
Let me just give you an example taken from Lubitsch's Temple of Man,
Sounds good.
and then we'll take the discussion from there. Again, if I can just shift to the share screen.
Absolutely.
Okay, so these two images are taken from the Temple in Man, is it? I
Yes.
think it's Temple in
Temple
Man.
and Man.
Something.
Yeah.
On one side is an accurate drawing, as far as I know, of the inner sanctum area of the Temple of Luxor, which is the oldest part of the building. It was a standalone structure, actually.
Hmm.
All of the rest of the elements of Luxor Temple were added by subsequent pharaohs. So the thing kind of grew over the period of a century or more. But this is actually taken from the Temple in Man. And what he's claiming is that the crazy paving look of the stonework, right, hides a mosaic of the head, which you're seeing next to it, overlaid. He says that head, that face, that profile is hidden in the crazy paving.
Okay.
And it was designed like that.
Right.
Now, I can't see it.
Oh, it's tough if you're
Maybe
just
that's the poverty of my imagination, but that seems far-fetched to me.
Mhm.
This is a structure from what, 1800 BCE,
Right.
erected near the Nile. I'm not aware that it has major subsidence problems. But over the last 4,000 years, I'd be surprised if it wasn't subjected like to some earth tremors, earthquakes, and that. Um, I just have a huge difficulty in crediting his argument that the placement of the individual flooring slabs was designed to encode a head in profile.
Right.
And yet, this is fundamental to his argument.
Right.
Now, there's additional problem I have with this, and I can just come out of the share screen. Let's just pass over that. The additional problem with this, what possible connection could this have with Egyptian belief and culture?
Right. Mhm.
Because a temple of Luxor was erected specifically for one purpose, and that's to celebrate the coronation and re-coronation of the pharaoh on a yearly basis as part of the Opet festival. So from Karnak, they would bring the boat with, like the god on it from the Temple of Amun, and it would be carried all the way in a huge processional to Luxor, and then in these inner chambers, there's a bas relief illustrating the nativity sequence of the ruler. And basically, the nativity story is that Thoth comes along to the mother of the pharaoh, tells her she will give birth to the god's son. Okay, she's going to give a kind of divine birth, a virgin birth, let's say. And then she is kind of possessed by the deity. He actually depicts this, and impregnated magically by the deity. She gives birth to it. And that day, sorry, that child is the divine child of the god Amun, and that's the ruler. Okay, so some ritual was enacted in these rooms, which kind of has some not one-to-one correspondence with this nativity sequence.
Okay.
And on a yearly basis, it kind of renewed the essentially divine nature of the ruler. So this is not a celebration of men, of man in the abstract. It's the celebration of Amun's son, or the sonhood of the pharaoh as a divine being. That's what it's celebrating. So I know I'm kind of astonished that he should have read it this way. And that really made me think a little bit more about the context. Now, in the 1880s, 1890s, there was a symbolist artistic movement, which was very strong, and it had various dimensions in the esoteric community. And one of those dimensions was people like Tsar Paladin, who declared himself monarchist, royalist, Catholic, and so on. In other words, there was a syncretist movement within French esotericism, for whom the notion of a theocratic state with its, castes,
Right.
all the type castes of people, top down, was an incredibly, I don't know, attractive proposition. So they tended to look at Egypt as though here's the rationale for this system. So synarchist, symbolist, 19th, late 19th century, early 20th century French esoteric thought is permeated with this. And Schwaller Lubitsch, René Guénon, all of these characters are all connected with each other in this synarchism. And I don't mean to tar Lubitsch with this, but this syncretist movement had ties to the Thule Society,
Yeah.
esoteric Nazism. It was there, and I'm not sure whether they ever really made a clear statement of separation from that tendency. I'm not clear that ever happened.
No.
Okay, so it's there. There's a problem, therefore, for me with the angle at which they're approaching Egyptian culture and Egyptian cultural artifacts.
Yeah.
And it's like before the ethnographic turn.
Right. Okay.
Instead of looking to Africa, because this was also the height of empire, 1880 to 1920s, 30s. This is when Italy, France, Britain, Germany were all building. It was called, what was it? The Race for Africa, or the Scramble for Africa.
Scramble for Africa. Yeah.
Yeah. They were carving it up amongst themselves. There was a massive exploitation of African resources. And somehow this Afro-Semitic culture of the Nile Valley was somehow not a part of that.
Right.
It was like kind of, I can't escape the feeling that there was some notion of ethnic or racial purity driving this discourse. I can't quite escape that idea, was part and parcel of this putting Egyptian culture on this pedestal.
Right.
And refusing to look at, for instance, the long-standing traditions of African divine kingship as the immediate predecessor for pharaonic rule.
Right.
That ethnographic reflexivity and sensitivity just wasn't there in my eyes. And that's what I see reflected in, Schwaller Lubitsch. So if we roll on this a bit, You now have like the Osirion and the Sphinx enclosure and the Temple Valley, um, whatever that is, temple, whatever that is, are all now cast back to like 10,000, 12,000 BC.
Right. They're much older, apparently.
So when we look at Anatolia, we have the structures of that age.
Right.
Göbekli Tepe rests on a continuum. To the east are even older structures. So you can see a development sequence up to Göbekli Tepe. There's like 20 or 30 circles as part of the Göbekli Tepe complex. And it's surrounded by dwelling places. Okay. And then that goes forward. You see the T pillars used in places like Navali Chori, 1 or 2 millennium afterwards. Okay. In other words, it's not like you have the Osirian.
Right.
There's, it's like it fell out of the sky or something. It's just not credible to suggest that it's the outcome of a 10,000, 12,000-year-old civilization that has left no other trace.
Right.
It created this temple and disappeared into the sand. That's not credible.
But you
So
do have you do have people trying to make the argument though with the idea that there's rain damage on things like the Sphinx, and so it
yeah,
must be much older.
yeah,
What retort do you have to that? Because that's what I hear all the time is like there's obvious rain damage
yeah,
on the Sphinx.
yeah. Yeah, it's become a meme. It's like
Right.
so deeply ingrained in the culture now, and it is exciting stuff.
Yeah.
But over the past 20 odd years, the science has finally started to catch up
Right.
with some of these narratives. Um, and the important one regarding the enclosure, the Sphinx enclosure, is that no river continues to flow in the same place forever. It doesn't. It silts itself up, it moves, it makes oxbow lakes. It does. Rivers do all kinds of strange stuff over the course of millennia. And the Nile used to flow across, when it inundated, used to flow and flood what we call today the Gaza Plateau.
Right.
So for thousands of years, you would have this inundation, deep inundation of water. It would seep through the rock strata, creating vertical fissures and then drying out season after season after season. So if you dug the enclosure anywhere on that plateau, it would show vertical erosion patterns because the nature of the rock there is like that after thousands of years, not because it rained like hell in
Right.
10,000 BC, you know. That that's it. And when we kind of take this kind of sensible logic, I know it's a bit disheartening, but we look at the Assyrian, for instance. There's another building is claimed to have been, thousands and thousands of years old. We've now got 2 dovetail joints. These are metal joints that are used to bind together large blocks. Okay, stop them moving and grating against each other. And because of the erosion of the wall in certain places with time, it's exposed a couple of these dovetail joints, metal, and they're stamped with Seti the First's
Hmm.
emblem. So it's a bit hard to say, how they would get embedded in the wall of the damn building, afterwards, or 10,000 years before he existed.
Right.
And there's the development of what they call luminescence dating, which enables you to establish how long that rock has been exposed. That's say cut away from the bedrock and exposed to sunlight. And that also gives dates comparable to Seti the First reign, give or take a century or so. So it's now the problem is
It's not disheartening though, because again, as I said, but this stuff deserves a real history, and all of this other kind of conversations, particularly with something like René de Schwalder de Lubitsch's work. You were right. Since then, our understandings of how Egyptian culture through the dynasties was apprehended, and that has changed entirely. Deliberich got to the site and kind of made up a story while
yeah,
he was there, right?
yeah, Yeah, he pasted it on top, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So what is significant now is how a culture like Egypt that was making sophisticated temples, given that Abydos is the nome of Osiris, you know, each of the 42 nomes was dedicated to a tutelary deity and goddess. Um, Given that Abydos was the home turf of Osiris, you know, why they thought it was a good idea to adopt a megalithic style or a megalithic idiom is so interesting, you know. And then the very sophisticated blocking of the natural flow of water into that cavity area, where they were going to create it as though it's the island emerging from the primeval sea. You know, the symbolism is so rich.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the use of a megalithic idiom to give it resonance is so interesting, you know. But once you like say, well, this is all non-Egyptian, it was done 10,000 years before the Egyptians existed, is to really extract something from that culture,
Mhm.
you know, which shouldn't, you know, we need to give credit where credit's due.
Right.
The architecture is absolutely amazing of the Osirian. You know, they still can't fathom aspects of this building,
Oh,
you know, how it was executed, how the flow of pressure of water is maintained from another source. It's not from the Nile, it's coming from a aquifer somewhere.
right.
And how it, you know, just how they did it is just a mystery. But it's a most amazing structure. And again, because of its use of a megalithic idiom, it has a different quality about it. You know, it speaks to the ages in a way in which the temples don't, actually. The temples have a different grandeur. The other thing I want to say on Shlomo Lubitsch is the temples that he was looking at as though they were abstract geometrical constructions are covered from head to tail in hieroglyphs and scenes. You know, they speak volumes about the designers and what the designers intended for them.
Right.
But you don't really get that sense of that from the Temple in Man. You know, it's like
He's taking a bird's eye view.
forget all that stuff. You know,
Right, right. Forget what
forget what they were actually telling
you.
you. There you go. You know.
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, so I think that's all I want to
Okay.
say about Lubitsch.
But it is true. If anybody has ever been to Egypt and gone to some of these sites, a lot of times it'll be in a very touristic, and you'll usually have a tour guide and things of that
Yeah,
variety. But um, I'd say, and I hope this doesn't sound, obvious, but they speak for themselves. They truly do. Spending time there is incredibly fascinating,
yeah.
even if it's only for 15 minutes. It's awe-inspiring in every way, shape, or form.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's like because they had a theocratic state, because of the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, the concentration of wealth and power was so intense in the narrow confines of the Nile that it kind of went vertical,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, hierarchically, architecturally, everything
There's
was
no
up.
other way to go
It's
up
like
but
New
up.
York, you know, it's like Manhattan, for God's sakes. It's the same kind of logic there in a sense. You
Definitely.
know, it's the desiccation of the surrounding desert from like the fourth millennia onwards,
Right.
forced a concentration of cultures and languages, traditions. So, you know, you look at Egyptian religion, you have all these deities, you have half a dozen different absolute creator gods. You know, they got like half a dozen of them, you know, all vying for that role, you know, and in different times it'd be a different one.
Different
Ptah,
places. And
Ammon, you know,
yeah,
as they move the capital around, a
right.
different would like assume. So also like the myth cycles of the Delta, you know, which is like the primary vegetation deity, and then the myth cycles of the pastoral land, associated with like Set, a desert animal, Hathor, the desert goddess, and is the Egyptian afterlife in the stars or is it in the underworld? Which of the two patterns do you follow? And like the belly of Hathor is all the stars, it's the Milky Way. And yet the Amduat and all of those Book of Gates and all underworld,
Right.
which is appropriate for a vegetation deity who dies, goes underground, comes out again. So, there's no reconciliation within Egyptian religion. It's all there. You
Yeah.
just choose which parts most appeal to you.
Sure. We have to shift gears here to probably a culture or two cultures which we gain a lot of our inheritance from, and that is Greece and Rome. So after Egypt, I think for us in the quote unquote West, their structures, at least those that remain, are still just like Egypt, looked at with awe. I had an opportunity to visit, specifically when I was in Tunisia, an area there called Duga, which I believe is actually like the best preserved Roman city,
Yeah,
still somewhat intact. And it's from what remains from the area where they did horse races to the bathrooms to the carvings of phalluses on the floor directing your way to where the
yeah,
brothel was. It's incredible. So what were the Greek, and I'm sorry to smush them together, but just for time's sake,
yeah. Greco-Roman is fine. There's no
yeah.
problem.
But what is their contribution to sacred architecture? Because it seems long tenured if we're finding aspects of it within something like the Hagia Sophia.
Yeah. Again, I kind of break down the Hellenistic contribution at least,
Okay.
and,
Okay.
and Rome has some aspects of this.
Yeah.
Um, First of all, we already talked about situational architecture. That's to say, the connection between temples, oracles, and underground, geopsychic places of geopsychic stress. That still stands. Claros, Didyma, all the oracles. And I say the Temple of Hecate at Lagina, where I had some extraordinary experiences. These are intense areas of geopsychic activation and continue to be active today. Um, there's an umbicular ritualization of the landscape in Hellenistic tradition. And what I mean by that is they would typically connect a major city with its sanctuary using a sacred way. So, for instance, from Athens, Eleusinian, there was a sacred way to Eleusis, which is a day-long walk marked by breaks at like cemeteries, waterfalls, springs, outcrops of trees, places of historical interest where a ritual would be performed. So there's an umbilical relationship between the city and its sanctuary. And you see this again with Stratonicea and Lagina, the temple estate of Hecate. You see it in Miletos and Didyma. Okay, these are all walks you can do today, by the way.
Cool.
These sacred ways have been opened up. And for instance, the one from Miletus to Didyma is substantial walk. And at each stop, there'll be the spirits of place that need to be placated, recognized, and prayed to, or a place where heroes are buried,
Okay.
and again, they will be honored, So umbicular relationship with the landscape is a significant marker of Hellenistic sacred architecture. Mythic encounters is another one. That would be, certainly in Anatolia, mountain peaks, caves, were routinely made into ritual spaces, like all around Mount Ida in the Troad. Large outcrops of rock would have steps carved into them, and they're they're natural, but they've been shaped as well to a certain extent. Um, and and around them there'd be like a sacred enclosure, and the worship of the great goddess, great Anatolian goddess, is associated with these sites. So um, uh, it actually reminds me of this notion of song lines in
So, yeah,
Australia,
right. Hmm.
We did see something like that with the geographic alignments. Now, for Anatolia, again, let me come to the work of Jean Richer, and I can illustrate this again. I hope
We're
if
doing
I can
pretty good
get
so far as the
it.
sharing. It's we're 4 for 4.
Let's see if I can just move past this. Sorry, this is stuff about Isaac Newton and his. Okay. Okay, this is about sacred geography. We're going to talk about that shortly.
Yes, we
I
will.
think I have to go back and all the way back. Sorry about this. Yeah, to this one.
Okay.
Uh, this is taken from a book by Jean, The Sacred Geography of the Ancient Greeks. And just like the work of Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst, he connected up the Ammoneon, the site of Ammon in the Egyptian desert, oracular site, with the oracular sites of Delphi, Delos,
Yeah.
and Sardis.
Yeah. Huh.
And what it looks like, what what it seems as though what we're looking at,
Oof.
I think, is a crystalline grid that enfolds the entire planet. And I don't know what level within the Earth's structure would generate this kind of electromagnetic field, but it's discernible from the surface
Okay.
as connected lines of force with localized nodes where the force is particularly powerful. And so the entire Aegean is a focus connecting the Aegean world. The Hellenistic world actually is what is depicted here,
Right.
because it encompasses Greece, all of Anatolia, and all of Egypt, North Egypt.
Right.
That is the Hellenistic ecumen or culture and linguistic heartland. And it appears to be connected as well in quite profound ways. There's an even more complicated version of this in the book. So I would reckon, and he goes as far as to say that, for instance, based on Sardis, um, you can draw 12 segments, okay? And in each of them, the coinage within each segment has the symbols of the astrological sign which controls that segment.
Okay. Well, hmm.
So, in other words, this design was explicit in the minds of people
Huh.
and priests, I guess, who manned these sites. Um,
What is the I'm just sorry to hang on this for a little sec, but the cross section in between there seems to be an X from Delos up to Delphi. What is the meaning of that X at the very top of the of sorry the base of that triangle there?
okay, I'm going up the triangle. There's a line. This line goes through Didyma to Sardis, by the way. So it's connecting the Temple of Apollo, which is just by Miletus, as we just discussed. It's
Right.
the articular relationship. And from Sardis to Delphi,
Hmm.
and from Sardis to the sanctuary of Apollo, Lithaeus,
Yeah.
on the other side, through Delos.
Right.
And from Delphi through Delos to Rhodes, where there's another temple site.
Hmm.
And then again, what Risha is claiming is that on each node, major node like Sardis, there would be 12 segments in which those regions, their local currency would mark the astrological
Okay.
design. It's just absolutely amazing stuff.
Hmm.
Anyway, so this is part of the heritage that we were talking about. Okay, so just escaping from that. Uh, so the zodiac centered on those sites. Okay. We already talked about the ley lines. And I think that brings us to the topic of sacred geometry and
Oh
its
dear.
relationship to sacred architecture, if
Okay.
I'm
Yeah. So
we'll
for
get through this.
for people, whenever you bring up magical architecture, sacred architecture, you're going to get somebody will put up the Fibonacci sequence, and it's just like it's this kind of stuff rises up like all the time, and people will start talking about something known as sacred geometry, and that how some certain architects had this, they would construct buildings along some kind of sacred geometry. So, Peter, let's dissect sacred geometry then.
Okay, so the two dimensions to this question then, one is geometrical form and the other is architectural expression. So I want to preface my remarks. I mean, when I was at university, I often worked at building sites around Liverpool in my, to earn money during the holidays.
Cool.
Building sites are messy places.
Mm.
I want to just preface my remarks on sacred architecture and geometry on that.
Speaking from
That
experience, speaking from
yeah,
experience in
yeah,
Liverpool of all places.
yeah. Worked on some of the, as a laborer, lowest of the low, hauling bricks and mixing
Wow.
cement and concrete and what have you. Okay, so geometry suggests a high degree of sophisticated, like articulation.
Right.
Okay. Uh, Ancient building was infinitely crude and messy. Okay. Because you don't have, it's not just you lack the equipment to move huge weights around, you lack the equipment to measure it. So rules of thumb and experience are priority. Okay. So let's talk about geometrical form. One of the, classic texts, Plato's Timaeus, introduces the Pythagorean cosmogenesis in geometrical and mathematical terms, ratio and proportion. And this feeds very much into Euclid's geometry. So at the school of Athens, where Proclus taught, Euclid's geometry was one of the contemplative spiritual exercises, working the problems. Now, that may not seem intuitively very spiritual to most of us because we're not taught like the first book of Euclid
No.
in the way in which Proclus taught it. And the reason is that certain passages are deleted from the modern texts. And I'm going to read you one just so you get the flavor of what they were actually doing then. This is Proclus talking about Euclid. The gods that guard the poles have been assigned the function of assembling the separate and unifying the manifold numbers of the whole, while those appointed to the axes keep the circuits in everlasting revolution around and around. And if I may add my own conceit, the centers and poles of all the spheres symbolize the wry-necked gods by imitating the mysterious union and synthesis which they effect. The axes represent the connectors. That's a category of spiritual entity in the Chaldean oracles of all the cosmic orders. Okay, so and the very spheres are the likenesses of the perfecting divinities. In other words, the angles, the geometry is infused with a hierarchy of entities and beings, most of which are derived from Chaldean oracles. Okay. Wry-necked gods, you may recall that it's used like Strophilos and various devices used in augury, spinning devices. The wry-necked gods inhabit those and intermediate between humanity and the gods.
Okay.
So the geometry is a physical act of intermediation between yourself and the deities via these possessing entities. This is slightly different than your school
Right.
Euclid, right?
Right. Yeah.
Just a little.
Yeah.
So the problem is, of course, this notion is kind of edited out as we move forward into the Christian era. So it still kind of existed in the Renaissance, but thereafter, so you'll see, for instance, people like Botticelli using sacred geometry in the Primavera. Dürer's Melancholia is another example, the impossible object
Right.
at the center of that painting. And I may add, I think possibly the end date I can find is Poussin's Et in Arcadia Ego from 1638, which has a distinctive geometry, which if I had added the slide, I could have showed, but I forgot to do it. But it has a beautiful underlying geometry to it. So at some point, our notions of sacred geometry lost their connection with the animist world.
Okay.
Okay? And it became like a kind of aesthetic game, so to speak. So does this connect in any shape or form with architectural form?
Hmm.
Is the question I'm asking myself. And
Uh,
again, as we saw earlier, synthamata, symbola, akira, poeta, were all animist concepts showing the embodiment of matter with spirit, with entities, beings, never mind spirit,
right.
actual entities and beings, the hierarchy of beings. So when I come to consider architecture from a sacred point of view, there's a lot of play made with the golden mean, the Fibonacci sequence, and the problem I have with that is the messiness of the construction site.
Hmm. Okay.
The way, the
Experience you
sheer,
have. Yeah.
yeah, the sheer size of the blocks that are being moved. And I'll give you an even better reason why I'm a little bit skeptical about this, just sticking spirals on the front of classical architecture. We have the architect's drawings
Right.
for the Temple of Didyma
Okay. Whoa, whoa,
from
really?
the,
Okay.
from the 3rd century BC. Okay. And I'm going to show them to you.
That's crazy.
A picture is worth, 1,000 words. Always. Let me see if I can get them up for you. Okay. So what you have here in the gray lines
Okay.
is the wall space in Didyma. And they've used that to inscribe on it instructions to the builders.
Huh.
Okay, so the pink lines represent a column. The reason there's so many pink lines is there's about a foot space between each of them
Huh.
that the builder was meant to take account of. And what the architect is saying to them, you need to put a curvature into the column as it ascends.
Hmm.
Why would he do that? It's not straight lines.
No.
Why would he? He's doing it for an aesthetic reason. So on top of all the, so to speak, the straight lines that you would expect or anticipate as defining a classical temple. And this is like for the front of the Temple of Didyma. He's actually built in a curvature so that from the position of someone standing at the base of the column looking up, it seems to, yeah, this is an adjustment to the geometry of the architecture in order to have a specific effect on a viewer.
Hmm.
And let me show you another even grander example of this. if I can get this to move. There.
Okay.
Do you see something strange about this?
It's not, it doesn't look straight. There's no straight line. Well,
It's not straight, is it?
no, it's no straight line.
It's deliberate.
Yeah.
So the pediment of the Temple of Didyma, the center of the pediment is raised about 11 centimeters as compared to the ends.
Hmm.
And that goes on throughout, of course, the entablature, the pediment. Why has he done that? This is working on your perception on a subliminal level.
Okay.
And what the architect is saying is, I am going to infuse this building with a sense of it having an inner dynamism.
Hmm.
And the way I'm going to do that is by imparting this bulging, very, very gentle bulging note shape to it, which you won't be able to perceive from outside, but which will affect you on a subliminal level.
Right.
And it'll suggest that the building is infused with an energy.
Hmm.
Okay, so once you've done that, it doesn't obey really, the golden section drawn on top of it is not the issue.
No.
Okay. There is proportion and ratio and proportion definitely in the connection between tablature, the columns, the entablature, the pediment, so on. There's all that. But
Right.
more important than that is the infusion of this energetic, dynamic nature to it, which on a very subtle level, okay, you need to take really careful measurements. Now, if anyone wants to check up on this stuff, there's an article that was published in Scientific American that I have derived this information from. It was based on an examination of the architect's drawings at Didyma
Hmm.
inscribed into the walls. So if you throw some water onto the walls, the lines show up again,
Okay.
scraped into the stone. Okay, so you throw some water on there from your water bowl, you'll see the lines, the instructions from the architect in the third century BC to the builders on
Oh.
how to go about doing this stuff.
Hmm.
So anyway, it's there if anyone wants to check
I'll,
it out.
I'll try to find that
Now,
and put that in the show notes for sure. The article from Scientific American.
I'll send you the reference if you like. I
Absolutely.
mean, I do have it to hand, believe it or not. December
1985.
1985,
I was 2 years old.
$2.50.
Those days are gone.
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
As is Saw,
Like page
unfortunately.
126. It's a very short article, but you can purchase this
Okay.
as a PDF, as I did.
Okay.
And then you can, read the article itself. It's a real research piece on the Temple of Didyma from the perspective of the architecture and how they went about designing it. So it's quite a unique
Fantastic.
uh, insight into something that a lot of people talk about, but without a real foundation.
Right.
That's the problem I have. The foundations exist, but you need to dig them out. It's not enough just to accept people's statements about Fibonacci
Well,
sequence.
I'll tell you what happens, and what I find is that a lot of times when people make these kind of statements, they're going off of pictures, which
Yeah,
are two-dimensional representations, and then of course they can draw lines all over it. But if you actually
yeah,
go to these sites, you will see that bulge and things that now that you've pointed it out, it's not that it's obvious when you're there, but they affect you on a level that can't be encompassed through
yeah,
things
yeah,
like
yeah,
two-dimensional media, or even
yeah,
a video. Like you
yeah,
can't get that. These things were meant
yeah.
to be perceived in person for the most part.
Yeah, that's what I say. It's playing, on a subliminal level,
Right.
and that's incredibly sophisticated.
Yeah.
The slight adjustments, like 11 centimeters, that pediment in Didyma is like, I mean, it's massive. So the chance that you would actually detect the bulging physically is very low, very, very low.
Yeah.
You have to make the most careful measurements to see the architect's intent there. Anyway, I throw that in. Also, a lot of mathematicians do accept that something like the Fibonacci sequence can be discerned in organic matter.
Right.
But it's not precise. It's not mathematical in the same way. Um, and like fractals give you a better mathematical modeling actually of growth patterns. Okay.
For sure.
So maybe 100 years from now, everyone will be talking about fractals and
Right.
Greek temples, and
Many would look at European cathedrals and
yeah,
call these structures sacred. They're sacred structures, and they have been sacred for centuries, and they were built to be sacred. Uh,
yeah,
what's your opinion on the European cathedrals, particularly in places like
yeah,
France and Germany and
yeah,
England,
yeah. Yeah,
Spain?
I mean, I've been to Chartres, I've been to many of them, and they're very impressive structures, no doubt about it. But for me, what they represent is the triumph of a state-sanctioned transcendentalism
Okay.
as a spiritual path.
Okay.
And that's like 180 degrees in the opposite direction to my own.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So, like we talked about Justinian's crushing of Hellenistic culture to impose orthodoxy as a state-sanctioned religion, and Catholicism with the Vatican and the Italian ruling families is a parallel process.
Okay.
So it's kind of that enforcement of conformity across Europe, whether under the Orthodox or under Catholicism, has been a tremendous force for cultural destruction, war.
Mhm.
And essentially, whereas in the Hellenistic world, anyone could show up to the great mystery cults and engage with the deities directly.
Right.
With the imposition of this transcendentalism, that was taken entirely away and replaced by obedience.
So, Peter, can I just stop you for 1 second? How would you explain transcendentalism to somebody, say, like one of my listeners who have no idea what that term means? Well, how would you describe transcendentalism?
Okay, there's a transcendental deity and there's nothing else.
Just okay, yeah,
And your only pathway to that is by obeying the priesthood.
okay,
And this has been like the paradigm in Europe for, 1,500 years or so. You can attend mass and they use the phrase mystery of the consecration and so on and so forth, but effectively you're shut out of it. Your path to deity is obedience.
right,
um, and this stands in sharp contrast to the immanence of deity, which arises out of the possession cults and therefore was formalized in the mystery cults of antiquity, where it becomes your personal experience. They're not teaching to you. There was no teaching given
no,
at the mystery cults. There was not a body of doctrine. There was nobody to obey. You showed up, you purified yourself, and you went along and you had it, direct personal experience.
right,
Make of it what you wanted. Nobody was there to, frame it for you.
right,
So that's like the polarity we're faced with. And I think that is reflected in the architecture. The soaring architecture gives you a temporary sense of engaging with the spiritual. And immediately you come out of it, you lose it. You can't, it's not sustainable. And that's my critique of that architecture as a sacred architecture.
right.
From an aesthetic perspective, I can appreciate it like anyone else. I love those things. But as a spiritual path, I think it doesn't lead anywhere.
Oh,
Unless you're going to go into one of the mystical orders of monks and some, but that's different.
right,
That's total immersion in silence and contemplation. I've got nothing to say against it. Okay. So there's not a comparison to be made between the cathedrals and the temple culture, the sanctuaries of the Hellenistic world.
Hmm.
Egypt was something different, of course, because it was theocratic state, a Bronze Age theocratic state. So everything flowed through the ruler to the people. You know, it was a completely different paradigm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was not a participative culture. Hellenistic culture was the demos, it was participative.
Hmm.
Catholicism and Orthodoxy are non-participative
Yes.
in a spiritual sense. You just attend and obey.
Right.
Okay. So that's the basis of my, critique or understanding. Um, take it or leave it.
For sure. But a lot of this by the time we get to say a period like the Renaissance, the cathedral project for the most part was kind of finished, I'd say.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but what occurred with this idea of sacred architecture during the Renaissance in Europe?
I think mainly you see a wave of secularization taking place.
Okay.
Um, that for me, like the 15th century, saw the Council of Trent, the Counter-Reformation, and Europe plunged into one of its dark periods, Hundred Years' War, so on. You know, until the Peace of Westphalia in the opening decades of the 17th century.
Late.
In, yeah, it's late. And it provided the legal basis for the nation state,
Hmm.
1630, 1635, which we've just exited, by the way. We're now in the corporate age in which the corporation will shape the legislation. Okay, so we had a period there, and of course the national movements within Europe are attempting to reclaim uh, the Peace of Westphalia, that dispensation, let's call it. But the Council of Europe is essentially a corporatist edifice. And actually, it was first mooted by the same synarchists that we described in the late 19th, early 20th century.
Right.
They were the first people to start agitating for a Council of Europe.
Hmm.
Okay, that is interesting.
It is.
Anyway, by the by, so you had the Reformation, and with the Reformation, you had a downsizing of the sacred space.
Okay.
And it became a very personalized religious experience again.
Right.
There was a kind of leveling of the participation and the clergy, small scale spaces, Quaker spaces, Calvinist, and so on and so forth. So outside of like Spain and parts of France and Italy, which retain the grandeur of the transcendentalist dream, the monotheistic transcendentalist dream, you have a massive downsizing of religious ambitions. And ultimately, the 17th century was also the age of the scientific revolution. So from the 17th to the 18th century, there's a systematic, it became a denigration of the spiritual, of the religious life by the 19th century, in my mind.
Hmm. Is it
Okay.
reflected in the architecture of the time? Is all of this,
Yeah.
or is it, as you say, it becomes more personalized, and so there's no need.
Yeah.
The
Well,
edifices are more personal, or
you still have stuff like Westminster Abbey, which is, 17th century, 18th century, but it's imbued with the spirit of the state,
right,
not of religion. I mean, everyone who's anyone is buried in there. Okay, that's where you do all the royal rituals.
right.
It's a different kind of religion. It's again the state-sanctioned religion. It's not a participative. Nobody's asking you to have a spiritual experience in connection with any of this stuff
No,
anymore.
no,
It's not on offer.
no.
Okay. And that's really, to my mind, the reason for the explosive growth in the esoteric and occult tradition within Europe. People have that hunger, that need, and they find it by reverting to forms that fall outside of these state sanctioned
Mm.
uh, systems and architectures and so on and so forth. So, you have the sudden interest in like Stonehenge, Avebury in England, and Glastonbury tour. And this is just getting stronger and stronger, actually.
Yeah,
Okay, so I know this is how I'm kind of positioning it in my mental space at the moment,
sure.
the long view, so to speak.
I like it. A lot of
Yeah.
people would say that, well, there is something to be said about the architect as a magician or as somebody who is building these structures in order to for people to have these kind of sacred experiences. But do we have any, to your mind, do we have any examples of architects who willfully proclaimed to put occult elements in the designs of their buildings?
The only one who really comes to mind is Gaudi.
Gaudi,
You
Barcelona.
know,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And the reason is, I mean, I think a lot of them, a lot of the architects were Masons, like Freemasons,
yeah.
so that their architecture is kind of more oriented to a kind of secular,
Mhm.
ethical system.
Right.
Okay, and probably you'd start have to digging around 19th century architects too. It's not really on the surface.
No.
Okay, it's difficult to see, but with Gaudi, you definitely have that. But again, it's in the soaring cathedral tradition,
Right.
you know, woven with this strange symbolism and so on and so forth. But no, we live in largely the public space is now a secular space,
Right.
and it has been since the 19th century, very strongly so.
Yeah.
Rational space. So you have your Corbusier, his most evocative designs were for private patrons, like a banker, so the bank had a place to put all his fine art that he'd accumulated. On a mass housing scale, Corbusier is like a nightmare of like, huge blocks,
Yeah.
soul destroying. Although he didn't intend it as such, he wanted to provide affordable mass housing with its own green spaces.
Right.
And what we have is a kind of nightmare vision of that in places like Marseille. You wouldn't want to walk there day, never mind night,
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
One of my first interactions with you, actually, my first interaction with you ever was on the platform formerly known as Twitter, in which somebody mentioned something about Peter Ackroyd's book, Hawksmoor.
Yeah,
And
right.
we both shared our appreciation for the story
Yeah,
within that book. But Nicholas Hawksmoor himself was an architect. If you go to London, there's, I believe, 6 or 7 of his churches still around.
yeah,
What makes this man for the idea of sacred architecture somewhat more, I'm going to say the word modern, although he's not considered modern. uh,
yeah.
what makes this man so fascinating to us, and his buildings, and why do artists such as Peter Ackroyd, Ian Sinclair in Lead Heat, as well as Alan Moore through such graphic novels as From Hell, why do they
Yeah.
find him so fascinating? Why is he so influential?
I don't know why they're picking on Nicholas Hawksmoor. I think more as a kind of a convenient cutout character
Yeah,
than
yeah.
as a reality. I don't think there's an architectural reality behind this.
No.
There's some his ideas were striking. There's no doubt about it. But as we received them in Ian Sinclair, you know, we're now in the flow of a long tradition of Gothic literature. Okay, with the pretext that there's a reality backing it up. Most Gothic literature is quite happy to have you, like, all the vampire stuff has its roots in traditions in Transylvania and Romania, actually. There's a strong tradition there. Um, but I don't think anyone would confuse, Peter Cushing, what's his name, Lee.
Right, Christopher Lee.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is going to really mix up, those films with actual
Vampire.
ethnography.
Right.
It's not going to happen. And I think with Ian Sinclair is that he's got a bizarre imagination
Hmm.
in which, the city is an entity of itself within the UK, and it has very dubious legal basis for its survival and its continuance. Like, it's a law to nobody, and yet the majority of the country's wealth seems to flow through it, and because of it. And that's a really bizarre situation. So it's almost, and it has these like dragon figures at the entrance to
Yeah.
the city, within the city.
Right.
And it's not hard to take a step from there to some pretty gothic thoughts about the source of this power. And so the laying of a kind of, well, any geometrical form which
Right.
encompasses the city
Yeah.
within the city is going to have a lot of resonance to it. Okay, so Ian Sinclair has picked up on this, and Aykroyd has kind of inflated it even more. And I love Hawksmoor. I think it's such an evocative book, but it's strictly in the stream of Gothic novels.
Yeah.
And we could, even if we're talking architecture, which we are, then we would have to go back to Lovecraft's Cthulhu, right?
Right.
And the city of R'lyeh,
Relay. Yes.
which has these non-Euclidean geometries
Hmm.
as its foundation. To even swallow up somebody, I think, when the sailors visit it.
That's right.
There's an angle there so strange that it actually swallows a person. So, you know, I think H.G. Wells had something similar in terms of these multi-dimensional spaces in one of his books. I can't remember which one offhand. So, yeah, there's a Gothic tradition like this.
Okay.
I don't give much credence to it,
Okay.
but I understand that given the role that the city of London plays within the United Kingdom,
Hmm.
you know, there's definitely something really off, something, unaccountable and bizarre about its very existence and to whom it answers.
Right.
But it doesn't answer to Parliament,
No.
which is so it's a kind of state within a state and immensely powerful. I say it accounts for the majority of the wealth, and for the strength of the pound is based on the city.
Right.
It's really bizarre stuff. So I don't know if that throws any lights on this.
I'd
One
like.
of the
Go ahead.
things that Peter Ackroyd has incorporated into Hawksmoor is the architecture of Wendell Dieterlen,
Hmm.
his Architectura. I even have a slide for you on
Do it.
that.
I love it. I saw a Hawksmoor slide when you were flipping through earlier. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
I really hope Peter shares this. I want to see.
Okay, let me just bang this up for you. And people can go and check this out for themselves. So this is actually a quote from Hawksmoor. He says when he peers into Wendell Dietel and his architecture, unveil to me the several orders of the Tuscan, and that's what I'm showing there.
Hmm.
People can go and check it out, and he talks about the strangeness and awfulness, the obscure shapes, the shadows, the massy openings, and so on. He's so enchanted with
Right.
this is the Gothic imagination at full stretch. Heaviness of the stone and so on, the gravest lies, the sides of the demons, crumbled walls, half humane creatures. And there it is. If you go and check out Dieterlen,
Okay.
you'll see these kind of strange, bizarre. I don't know if that's clear, if you can see that
Oh yeah, we
figure.
can. Yeah.
It's one of
Incredible.
the engravings of the Tuscan order. You can get what he's talking about immediately. But as I say, this is a long-standing tradition of Gothic literature. Goes back to the first to Lord Byron,
Right.
and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and I forget the name, the third guy who was with them who wrote the first vampire
Oh,
uh, book. I forget his name now. It's not important. Um, but that tradition, went on and on in English literature. So it's no surprise that it should, surface in Hawksmoor.
for sure.
None at
That in a way, I mean, I wouldn't. Would we classify that as sacred? The ability for these buildings, even without knowing the history of them, to be able to speak to people and artists generally in a way in which they get so influenced by them that they create another form of mythos. Although it's it's not true, particularly when we're talking about Nicholas Hawksmoor and as they're
Yeah,
portrayed through Alan Moore's work.
yeah.
But still, it's a powerful a myth.
So yeah, I mean, I get you entirely. I mean, you're right. And that takes me back actually to the opening statement
Okay.
in our talk. He said, by sacred architecture, I understand any edifice
Mm.
that affects a shift in our awareness beyond the merely aesthetic,
Right. Yeah.
that engenders a sense of awe. And that awe may be demonic. I mean, that is also an option.
Right.
That sudden apprehension of being in the presence of some greater significance, the raw, something raw to express the unsayable.
Right.
And that's exactly what Gothic literature attempts to do, whether it's, Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos or Hawksmoor, Peter Ackroyd's or Ian Sinclair's Hawksmoor. It plays upon the fundamental impulse that underlies all sacred architecture.
Well said. I have to ask you, Peter, is there a building, a non-fictional building, one that people can go to, or a site perhaps yourself that you think that you'd like to put forward for people to really try to understand all of these concepts that we've been talking about for nearly 2 hours here? Is
Yeah,
there
yeah,
one or two buildings that you're just like, this is such a fantastic
yeah.
encapsulation?
Yeah, again, I mean the building that I put up right at the beginning of this talk, um, and I can just quickly put it up again as an illustration of this. The Parthenon
Wow. Yeah.
in Rome
Okay.
is absolutely stupendous,
Okay.
and the problem with the Parthenon is getting into it when nobody else is there.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, good luck with that. But if you can manage it, um, it's absolutely awe-inspiring. Hagia Sophia in Istanbul is less so now after its conversion to a mosque. Um, there's a lot of changes taking place. They lay a carpet on the floor. It's subject now to massive amounts of, well, basically restoration work. So as where you can walk in it is kind of restricted. A vast amount of its marble revetment, I mean, half of that is missing. And a huge amount of the gold tesserae mosaic that gave it its light, that golden light that it used to infuse the naos is not there. But it's still, by any standards, absolutely exceptional. And I would still say Chartres, or the Sacre-Cœur on the hill of Montmartre in Paris. They are exceptional. So in the UK, I think the two cathedrals, well, we have variety of sacred buildings, but it's all on this like transcendental monotheistic thing. So it's going to places like Stonehenge and Avebury, which are at the other end of the scale, of course.
Right.
Um, very, very different. So I know that's a scattering of thoughts. I mean, if you're in Italy or Turkey, it's not a problem. France is a good bet.
Right.
And then the ancient structures in the UK, I guess you have things like the Serpent Mound in the US, to
Yeah, I was going to say there's not a lot, there's not a ton over here. We're a fairly, yeah, a lot of the older things and older places have been
Yeah.
to quote a songstress from Canada, have been paved down and put in a parking lot. Truly, like
Okay, right.
it's
Joni Mitchell, huh?
that's right. Yeah, it's
Little
tough.
green, little yellow taxi,
Yellow,
wasn't it?
little yellow taxi. Yeah, it's
Okay, gotcha.
tough sledding over here. This is the big question, though, and I'm going to put it to you because you're the one that said that I should probably ask it. But under what conditions, when one goes to these areas or goes to these buildings, under what conditions do encounters with the sacred become possible, Peter?
Yeah, that's
It could be the whole podcast. Like truly,
it could be.
we could dissect this for another
Um,
2 hours.
yeah. I made a couple of notes on it, so let me just refer to those.
Absolutely.
I think for me, it presupposes that we have a certain metaphysical orientation to
Hmm.
reality,
Okay.
uh, characterized, let's say it's characterized by empathic engagement rather than merely rational appraisal. So
Hmm.
uh, you're attempting to bring a quality that mirrors the sense of awe that the building emanates. You want to match that on an emotional level rather than appraising it aesthetically or rationally. Um, it's a disposition attuned to immanence rather than this transcendence we're talking about. You're not looking for this soaring feeling. You're looking to embody. And given that, you're essentially making an emotional connection with the force or spirit that moved the designers and builders of that building. Okay, so essentially you're using consciousness to bypass the passage of time and space between you and the building's intended spirit and its embedded spirit. Does this make any sense?
Does there is a whole lot to unpack there. Would you say that it's supposed to be a relational experience? It's
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. So you need to take time to do a reset
yeah.
because, like it takes time and space, travel to get to these places. There's a host of practical things that you have to take care of, but then you need to do a reset from the practical before you engage with the edifice itself. Okay. So you set aside the instrumentalism, um, and then you need to allow a higher aesthetic faculty within yourself. I mean, the Chaldean oracles talk about the extended flame of the mind as the means by which you grasp or make a connection to a higher order of being or a higher order of beings, if you want. So the extended flame of the intelligence of the mind, of the heart and mind, has to be activated, so to speak.
I love it.
These are very subtle kinds of processes. Um,
You can't put it into a textbook though. Like this is not one of those things that you can point at like a Fibonacci sequence because
no,
that's what everybody wants, right? We want that we want this stuff to have explanations, right?
yeah,
Which leads into
yeah,
my other question here is because you mentioned that a lot of these sites, particularly the oracular sites, seem to have fresh water or springs and things of that
yeah.
variety.
They're geopsychic,
Right.
geopsychically active. Yeah,
So can I
yeah.
ask, in your opinion, are there certain like things that you see over and over and over again? And I use the word time honored, but perhaps there's a better word for it, that these sacred spaces they seem to need to have there in order for them to be sacred. Or is it just you notice that a lot of them have this, and a lot of them have as I said, like streams. A lot of them have are based on hills. A lot of them are located on certain lines. What do you see, Peter?
Okay, all of the ones in Anatolia and all of the temple sanctuaries, the oracular sanctuaries, the Hagia Sophia itself, all have running water underneath them. Every single one of them. And for that to be the case, there needs to be a displacement in the rock strata. So I believe that, like geopsychic activity was first spotted, I think, in Germany when they're looking for the reason for the concentration of cancers in certain locations.
Hmm.
And so the idea is there's certain types of geopsychic stress which are negative.
Okay.
They call them negative streams. And I can give you a reference for this if anyone wants to check it out. I think I made a note of. No, I didn't. I have the book. It's called Geopsychic Stress, I think. Something like. Tell you what, I will post you a
Sure.
few
Absolutely.
short
Yeah.
short bibliography.
I do every episode. I have massive show notes.
Okay.
I'm going to be
I
going
don't know.
through this. There's going to be
Okay.
everything on there.
So yeah, they found that certain areas of geopsychic stress are negative in the sense that they are associated with clusters of health problems.
Huh.
Okay, so using you can use like feng shui to redirect and ensure the flow is restored in those areas. Okay, so there's other areas like the oracular sites and sacred sites where the geopsychic stress is um, a, a positive force in it energizes your energy body from the kundalini upwards, from the base root chakra upwards, and gives access to expanded awareness. But you still need to tune into these sites. You need to set aside all of the instrumental mental processes that you bring, all that baggage. You need to make a space within your awareness to encounter these sites. And I would say a step further is you need to honor the spirits of place, quite literally. You have to, invoke them, ask for their assistance, and then allow the thing to happen. I would say that very strongly, actually, based on my experience.
Well, we know that things. I'm going to use this word, but I'm going to use it in a very broad sense. But the idea of a genii loci, it's
Yeah, yeah,
and we saw things like lares as being very huge to the Greco-Roman culture, right?
yeah,
And spirits of places,
uh,
something that a lot of people think about when they think about the buildings themselves. But
yeah,
that's
yeah.
such an important element,
Yeah, I mean the Parthenon was dedicated to all those deities.
right?
Hagia Sophia clearly they depicted the builder deities in the narthex. And within the revetment, I didn't show it, but the revetment itself has figures. They've done the book matching of the marble panels in such a way that they embody shapes and figures.
Yeah,
Okay. So yeah, very much present. And the question is whether you can get on board with this
right.
in order to access deeper levels of these architectures.
Mhm.
It's a magical act, in other words.
I love it. So, can I ask you, to just make things a little bit more personal, you mentioned that you had an experience while you were in Glastonbury where something felt cold, but cold was not the right word. Is
Yeah.
there is there in your mind that you can share when you went to a certain site of a certain sacred architecture site that you had, let's call it an experience that was very that's predominant in your mind that encapsulates almost everything that we've talked about today?
Well, I spent months, literally months inside Hagia Sophia in order to be able to write the book about it. And I would say that there's a level of awareness which is kind of the ineffable. It defies conceptualization. It's a sense of being there, being in a place of awe, internally. And that's a feeling rather than a thought. Um, and it's totally bound up with the, let's call it the weight. It's not weight at all, but the weight that that architecture uh, surrounds you with. Okay, so you're encompassed within another world. So you're not seeing necessarily, but the combination of light and sound is such that it allows your awareness to be in another space, which is not your regular zone of awareness. It's elevated. You come out of there as though you're cleansed and purified of something. Okay. So it's worked on you. And in that process, it's kind of wordless. It's, you lose the ability. It's like a strong initiation when you lose the ability to start to articulate. And, this happened to me when I first encountered Scarlet Imprint's books. I was in Watkins. They were all on the table there. And I started looking at them, but I couldn't read any sentence. I mean, I could see paragraphs, sentences, and, I'm literate. Couldn't read a word, you
Interesting.
know. It's something, I kept coming back to them and opening them again and opening and looking at them, putting them down, going around the and it suddenly occurred to me my awareness had shifted so radically in connection with these books that I could no longer engage with them on a rational level. What was causing that?
Right. The object itself? Was it the interaction? What, like, there's, yeah.
So, I mean, if you're inhabiting an animist world, you have to say that we're continuously under the supervision of the entities and beings that we ourselves worship and serve. And that's the way I view it.
I love it, Peter.
So all of my books are in that tradition. Every one is an expression of a devotional act, so to speak, to the spirits of place, whether it's the mysteries of Dionysus, the gods of the Hagia Sophia, and forthcoming, I hope, will be a major study of the uh, Temple of Amun and Luxor Temple. I hope in it. What I'm currently studying hieroglyphics to be able to reinterpret the reliefs within Luxor Temple, especially in connection with the nativity sequence, as a possible aid to enact the restoration of the ritual process of divinization that was enacted within that temple. So that is a project is ongoing. Let's hope it sees a beautiful realization in a year or so, 2 years maybe.
Fantastic. So, Peter, let's
Yeah.
uh, let's talk about everything that you have. So, as far as our conversation is concerned today, you wrote a book, fantastic book, Hagia Sophia, Sanctum of Kronos, Spiritual Descent in
Yeah.
an Age of Tyranny. Um, Talk a little bit about this book and why people that found this podcast interesting, why they should seek out this work.
That book, I mean, Mark Stavish was kind enough to review it, and people can check out his review on Paralibrum.
Okay.
I mean, any high quality review of esoteric occult literature will appear on Paralibrum, essentially. I've written several reviews myself over there. Mark Stavish's review says, unlike the books on Fulcinelli and the cathedrals, Peter Mark Adams, you can actually understand what he's saying, and he gives his sources.
Oh, there you go.
So you can actually check on what I say over there. But this is a pivotal sacred architecture because it, as I say, looks back to and is informed by the entire Hellenistic tradition. And it found its most sophisticated and its richest realization in that building. Okay. And that's why the book is so important. And the subtitle of that book is Spiritual Descent in an Age of Tyranny. Okay. So it's how those Hellenists, in the face of oppression and persecution, found an answer to it
Mm.
in the reaffirmation of the core spiritual values. So that today, even listening to that Byzantine choir, you're listening to music which is only one step removed from the Hellenistic pagan ritual music. Okay.
Fantastic.
They made it so it still existed. It continued to exist throughout the Byzantine period and went on to influence, of course, through the influx of texts, the second Renaissance, the Hellenistic Renaissance. Okay. And, Giovanni Arispa returned from studying Greek in Constantinople to Italy, 1423, 1426, and he had with him the complete works of Plato, complete works of Plotinus, complete works of Proclus, most of Iamblichus, and therefore the entire performative corpus of the Hellenistic world entered Europe at that time. And the
Fantastic.
rest is history, Ficino, and so on. So that's it. That's the story. That's why that book is so important for me.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Peter's also written some of my other favorite books, Game of Saturn, which maybe we'd have to have you back on the show to go through that because it's one of the most fascinating things I have ever read. I've
Yeah.
talked about it on this podcast before, I swear. Let's talk about something you mentioned a little bit earlier, which was the Egyptian mysteries. Tell us about what these courses are. And
Oh, the three-part course is a guide to the actual mystery. So I've taken an ethnographic approach. And what I've done there is break down what is a mystery cult.
okay,
And we go through that step by step, all the components necessary for a mystery cult. That's part one. Part two, um, the range of experiences and energies that are manifested during the enacting of a mystery ritual. So we break down, this is based on first-hand reporting from people who underwent mystery initiation, by the way.
okay,
So you'll understand how the space of the mystery cult functioned when the mystery initiation was being given.
cool.
Part three, we bring this to Egypt and we go through the process step by which the mystery initiation was enacted. And in that, I've got 2 or 3 accounts from Egypt of people who underwent this and described their experience. Again, first-hand experience of actually undergoing. And that's why that 3-part course is called The Egyptian Mysteries. As far as I know, it's absolutely unique. I
Yeah.
can't find this information anywhere else.
Right.
So Magical Egypt are hosting it if anyone wants to check it out. Or just type in the EgyptianMysteries.com. I think
Yep.
it has its
Yep.
own page now,
It
even,
does. It does.
and that'll give you a full course on actual mystery initiation in its wider perspective with first-hand accounts. So there's that. And then the other thing recently was the 2 Esoteric Tarot book with
Yeah.
Christophe Ponce.
Amazing.
Very much looking forward to his forthcoming book with Scarlet Imprint. First of 3 volumes, I believe.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, Tarot de Marsilio, it's called.
Jeez.
So I think the first one deals with the trump cards.
Hmm.
That's going to be very interesting going forward. But 2 Esoteric Tarots kind of finished off a lot of.
Conversation between.
Yeah, it was a
Yes.
conversation, but it
Correct.
enabled me to kind of complete what I've been saying in the Game of Saturn,
Okay.
but like from a flying over perspective. Because like Game of Saturn came out, it was work I did from 2013 to 2017 when it was published. And it's now like 2023 it came out, or I think at the
Yeah, it
end
was
of
last
last
year.
year.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's like quite a few years for me to reflect on the material again. So it gives another insight into the Game of Saturn and into the Solar Busker specifically. And we compare the Solar Busker with the Tarot de Marseille, given Christophe's interpretation of that as a Neoplatonic vehicle.
Right.
And I'm saying essentially they both have the same sources of inspiration,
Hmm.
but his is far more humanistic, whereas the Solar Busker is far more I don't know what you would call it. It's Saturnian, isn't it?
It's
It's more to do with the axis of power
yes.
in that sense,
Yeah.
you know. Yeah. Yeah. So we're able to reflect on that, and also it's like a forerunner in the advent of a libertine aesthetic in European culture. Because
Amazing.
I mean, there's nothing like it before the solar busker, you know, for its grotesqueries and what have you. So yeah, all good, clean fun.
Definitely. What you mentioned a little bit earlier, but what's next for Peter Mark Adams? Like, what's the big project? Is it something
Well,
another
the
book?
Egyptian one, the is going to be a big one. That's going to take a couple of years. But forthcoming, I hope this year or early next year will be my study of the Mithraic mysteries. So it's half written, it's half done, and I just need to complete it and send it off to Theon. And that'll actually give illustration of the from Capua Vetere. We have illustrations of the ritual being enacted of initiation.
Mithraic
Okay,
initiation.
yeah, we actually have the frescoes. So I've managed to find high definition images of those rituals. They'll be in there, and I connect it. It's essentially an imperial cult of Saturn, which a lot of people have not recognized looking at Mithraism.
No.
But it is actually the cult of Saturn in its Roman recension. So that's going to be interesting coming out. I hope it'll be later this year. I'm going to be rushing now to finish that off
Yeah, no
and
doubt.
send it off to Theon, and let's see, you know, if they can get it out this year. I'll be delighted if they can. So
Me too.
I'm going to be I'm doing my classes in hieroglyphics, and apart from that, I'll be finishing this book for the forthcoming months. Apart from that, I have a presentation at Metamorphosis, which is a conference being run by the University of Copenhagen.
Okay.
Okay, that's at the end, 30th and 31st of May. And on the 31st, I'll be presenting Gas Boucher's Anarch, which was published by Scarlet Imprint last year, I think.
Huh.
I wrote an extended review of it. It's on Paralibrum. And what we've done is take the imagery, the photographic imagery, and I've selected extracts from Anarch, and I read them out against the imagery with a soundtrack selected by Gas Boucher. He cannot appear himself because he lives in constant pain, so he can't travel, he can't speak.
Okay.
So I've got like a 5 minute introduction I'll give live, and then we'll run this 20-minute presentation, which we filmed. And Dara Mason, who's going to be, he's the author of the forthcoming The Song of the Dark Man of the
Yes,
Witch Sabbath. I wrote the foreword to
you
that.
did.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that'll be out this summer. And anyway, Dara and I narrated this, and Dara helped put it together as MP4. That'll be that'll be shown as part of this conference. So it's the metamorphosis, ecstasies of image and matter is the theme of the conference. Okay. And this Gaspuchet's work, Anarch, is metamorphosis within the alchemical nigrido. Okay. So that's the transformative stage. That's where everything that has form is broken down so it can be renewed.
Hmm.
You know, and that's his interaction with the forest in the Ardennes where he lives.
Interesting.
So his art is like the fauna flora, death and rebirth within the forest, which is captured in the photographic sequence. And the soundtrack is from Kevin of Hexen Sutek. It's like a very heavy
Hmm.
um, backing sound. So anyway, that's going on.
That be available to purchase online, or is it an in-person only sort of affair?
At the moment, I'm just submitting it as an
Okay.
entry
Okay.
uh, for the conference. I hope that we'll see what we can do with that. The 20 minute,
Yeah.
whatever that is, recording. Um, Obviously, we would need like Guest's Permission, Scarlet's,
Right.
Kevin's,
Mm.
Hex and Sutek is an ensemble, I think.
Right.
So if they're all agreeable, I'm quite happy to release it. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it
Exactly.
anyway.
Peter, where can people find your work?
Peter Mark Adams, just that easy.
Peter Mark
PeterMarkAdams.com, Peter Mark Adams YouTube channel. Everything I've ever recorded is over there on all of my books and everything. Just Google me.
for sure. There will be links in the show notes, everybody, for where to find Peter's work, produced by Scarlet Imprint and otherwise. Also, a wonderful book, The Power of the Energy Field, as well, which is
Oh, the power of the healing field. Now,
sorry,
that
healing field.
that book documents like 25 years of intensive energy work and all the strange, it catalogs the most bizarre cases that we encountered
Yeah,
in that quarter century of intensive healing work. It
fascinating.
includes past lives, um, multiple rebirths. Oh my gosh, there's a lot of stuff in there. If
Chris.
anyone's interested in the interstices of other dimensional space, they'll find it in that book.
Definitely, it's well worth all of.
Oh, it's all good, clean fun, family
Exactly.
entertainment.
That's right.
Oh, right through.
Peter, this has been such a mind-blowing discussion. My goodness. I would really hope that if some point in the future I'd ask you to come back on What Magic Is This, you'd be happy to do so, because I've had so
Yeah,
much
of
fun.
course.
This entire
Been a pleasure. Been a pleasure.
process has been so great, and I really hope that more and more folks find your work, because this is the kind of stuff that I live for. This is the discussions and the kind of interpretations of this. I think of very important aspects of what it is to be human, and I find that your angle in and the way that you look at it is entirely unique. And so, thank you for all you do, Peter.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it's been a pleasure. Been a pleasure.
Fantastic. Everybody, that's the podcast, video and audio and otherwise. Come on back to What Magic Is This. We're going to talk about more of this crazy pillared, cantilevered arch thing that we like to call magic and the occult. Until next time, I want each and every one of you to stay happy, to stay hopeful, and to stay luminous. Until next time, goodbye, everybody. Ta-ta. Goodbye. Hey everybody, Doug here, going to do that thing that I do at the end of every audio episode of What Magic Is This, but instead I will be doing it in video form, and that is to let you know a few things. The very first of which is, if you like what we were talking about in this episode and you want to learn a little bit more, head to whatmagicisthis.com and find all of the show notes that I will have there. Peter has promised to send me a list of all of the things that we talked about today, so those will be there. Expand your knowledge, research more. The show notes are pretty exhaustive, and they're great for every one of the episodes that I do. Again, those can be found at whatmagicisthis.com. Head to the episodes, find the Sacred Architecture with Peter Mark Adams link there, and you should be all good. Just want to also let you know that if you enjoy what I do here at What Magic Is This and you want to support me in some way, there are 3 ways, not 6, 3 ways of doing that. Let's go through them. The very first way is the best way, and that is to support me on Patreon. That is patreon.com/whatmagicisthis. It is only $7 American a month. That is nothing. That is a cup of coffee some days. That is a little bag of candy. Maybe not like cheap candy like jujubes, but expensive, nice quality candy like, I don't know, chocolate covered raisins or almonds. Sometimes those are pretty expensive. All I'm trying to say is that it's not very expensive, and there is a ton of great offerings that I have there, including videos as to how to do certain things within magic, like make your own incense or set up an altar to your ancestors, or how to petition saints like Saint Expedite, all sorts of things. I have full-length audio episodes as well, talking about all manner of things such as entities and saints and Greek gods, Egyptian gods. I even did one on gnomes. It's pretty awesome. All I'm trying to say is that the Patreon is some of my best work, if not my best work, and everything there is almost like a totally new show. So if you enjoy what I do here on What Magic Is This, and you want to see even more things as to how I look and perceive at magic as well as its history, the best place to do that is on the Patreon. Sure, this regular podcast is fine and it's all good, But truly, I personally consider my best work over at Patreon. And please, I would love to see you there. It gives you access to a fantastic community on Discord. There is so much great stuff, and I would love to see your support. That is truly the best way of keeping this What Magic Is This ball rolling. I would love your support. So again, patreon.com/whatmagicisthis, or head to whatmagicisthis.com. Find any number of the links there. If you're not a huge fan of the paying every month kind of thing, but you'd still like to show your support in some way financially, you can do it through PayPal too. WhatMagicIsThis.com's got plenty of PayPal links. Just click those double P's, and then you can send me $5, you can send me $10, you can send me $100,000. I can't do that with hand signals because I'd just be doing this for, I think, forever. I'd be dead. I'd be dead trying to I'm just going to stop doing that. But I went to clown college. Did you guys know that? I didn't, but I should have. Probably make more money. Just kidding. I make enough to live. This podcast is how I earn my living. Truly, I do this full time. My podcast is what I devote my entire day, sometimes every waking minute of my day. And I can't do that without your support. So PayPal is a great way of keeping me going. It all goes back into doing the podcast. Truly, it is for the hosting fees, the plugins for my editing software, everything that you donate on the PayPal goes straight into making sure that this podcast is as good as it is. The third way of supporting me, the number 3 way, is this way, is grabbing some merch. A shirt like this, perhaps, a mug like this. There's some coffee in here still. I'm going to finish it. Delicious. Tastes like magic. Oh, and things like notebooks like that. Although I don't think we can do the notebooks anymore. We might at some point in the future. Anyhow, what I'm trying to say is head to whatmagicisthis.com, click on the menu there, head to the merchandise button. All of the merchandise that's available there, there's hoodies, t-shirts, there's stickers, mugs, everything, tote bags even. There's so many great things that you can buy there, and you can show your support for the podcast. I don't see too much money from that, like dollars every month, and like less than $5 every month, but it's just great to see people wearing my stuff and going around. And if you do buy any of my merch, please, I would love to see a picture of it because I think it's amazing, and it blows my mind to think that in 5 years that I've had this podcast that people are wearing my stuff. I just love it. But not the greatest way of supporting me financially, but I still appreciate it nevertheless. But the place that I would love to see you would be on the Patreon. Again, $7 American. That is it. And you get basically a whole different program. You get a whole different show, and it's all of the best stuff. And also in access to a wonderful Discord community. But all of those things that I've just gone through are available at the website. Head to whatmagicisthis.com. All right, we're going to wrap up this video program here, and I hope that each and every one of you enjoyed it, and maybe we'll do a few more of these in the future. Until then, I want each and every one of you, again, to stay healthy, stay hopeful, stay luminous. Until next time, everybody, bye-bye. See you later. Hopefully.